Chapter 1. Arrival in Silence. The night seemed to have covered the city like a heavy blanket, woven from shadows and light. The streets were almost deserted, and the yellow lights of the lanterns barely made their way through the thin fog that lazily rose from the asphalt. An unnatural silence reigned over the cityscape. Not even the wind dared to disturb the natural order of that night, as if nature itself sensed a change. In a corner of the sky, where the full moon stood still, something strange was happening. First, it seemed just a play of light, or perhaps a visual error caused by the fatigue of a casual observer. Tiny, bright, slid among the stars, but it had an unnaturally calculated movement. The dot, a sphere of pale greenish light, grew larger and larger, until its outlines began to take shape. A mass of ethereal, green-phosphorescent energy, darkened in places by black shadows, slowly approaching the planet's atmosphere and the infinite vastness of the cosmos. Xorathis' arrival on Earth could never have been described as a noisy or spectacular event. Unlike other species that yearned for grandeur, the Vortherans preferred subtlety. For them, invisibility was the most precious gift, and Xorathis had learned his lesson. His ethereal being entered the Earth's atmosphere like a cold, undetectable breeze, a disembodied ghost from beyond the stars. As he traveled through the planet's subtle layers, Xorathis let himself be enveloped by the first sensations of Earth. The air was dense, charged with unknown scents and living particles that he could not yet understand. His senses, more vibrations than organs, detected every sound wave, every heat, and every breath in his vicinity. It was as if the planet whispered to him in an ancient, incomprehensible, but fascinating language. A primitive planet, he recalled the assessment made by the Vortheran Supreme Council. In their eyes, Earth was just a rudimentary world, inhabited by lower biological forms, dominated by emotional instability and irrational instincts. Xorathis had accepted the mission without question. He was an executor, an entity created to carry out orders. But now, surrounded by the invisible bustle of this living place, he felt for the first time a strange thing. Curiosity moved through the city like a shadow that cast no reflection. Pure energy, capable of crossing walls, hiding in cracks and perceiving every dark corner of the world. However, Xorathis knew that remaining in that form would not allow him to fulfill his mission. He had to become one of those human creatures that the Vortherans considered primitive. The symbiosis between himself and a physical form was nothing new to his species. He had been trained for this. But this time, instead of copying generic shapes, as in other missions, he had to be perfect. Earth was not a place where errors could be tolerated. Sitting down in a deserted square, surrounded by old buildings and dimmed storefronts, Xorathis paused. His etheric mass began to pulse in subtle rhythms, like an unseen heart. The intense green of his being blurred, becoming translucent, then began to take on a new density. The process of transformation had been practiced for millennia by his species, but here in the air of Earth, it seemed different. Physical matter responded more slowly, and the transformation required more effort than he had anticipated. First there were the fingers, long and delicate, molded from a material that seemed alive. Then the skin, a perfect membrane, a pale tone, like freshly polished porcelain. The hair, brown and soft, it fell to the base of his neck, reflecting the diffuse moonlight. The eyes, the most difficult element, materialized last. Metallic gray, deep and seemingly expressionless, but human enough to go unnoticed. Young face, soothingly beautiful but devoid of any features that would attract attention, was fully formed. Now, Xorathis was one of them. But what did they mean? The moment he became material, his senses amplified exponentially. For the first time, he felt the cold of the night touch his skin. The wind ruffled his newly grown hair. The sounds of the city, until then only diffuse echoes, assaulted him with intensity. The rustling of leaves, the sound of a distant engine, hurried footsteps on an alley. It was all too much. Xorathis closed his eyes and inhaled, a human reflex he had recently learned. Control, he told himself. He had to control all these new sensations. With his new body, he had also gained a strange, oppressive sensation. Something people called weight. His ethereal being had never been limited by the physical, but now, in this form, he felt the ground beneath his feet. He felt gravity pressing down on his body. The modern city seemed to him a complex but chaotic network. The concrete and glass buildings, the vibrant neon lights and the noise of technology seemed at first glance evidence of an advanced world. And yet, beneath this coarse layer, Xorathis felt a different vibration, emotions. The city pulsed with them. Each inhabitant left subtle traces of thoughts, desires and fears that he, in his new form, could perceive. He knew what he had to do. The mission was clear. Selena Novak, a human being who, inexplicably, possessed a genetic code that could solve the dilemma. Her identification had been simple. The Council's studies of Earth had been extensive. It was only a matter of time before Xorathis would find her, gain her trust, and bring her before the Vortheran Council. But Xorathis had not anticipated the strange feeling he now felt. Though the physical form was new to him, this sensation had been born beyond the confines of his body, an inexplicable pull, like a need to understand what surrounded him. Was this planet really as primitive as he had been led to believe? Deep in thought, Xorathis felt something approaching. From a side alley, a black cat appeared and stopped in front of him. For a while it stared at him, as if seeing him through the human mask. Then, in a simple gesture, the animal rubbed against his ankle and moved on. Xorathis lowered his gaze to that trace of life. For the first time, he felt something he couldn't define, a connection. "This planet has more to show than I thought," he whispered, and the words sounded strange in his own mouth. With slow steps, he began to walk, ready to penetrate the depths of this new world. As he stepped onto the ground of this world for the first time, Xorathis noticed how the darkness of the night seemed to hide truths that humans did not have access to. Every building, every street corner, hid something: stories, people, traces of life, fragments of hopes and disappointments that floated in the air, like an old perfume. Crossing the narrow alley that connected the deserted square to a more lively street, Xorathis' steps were uncertain, but not because of his newly formed body. In reality, every second in that world added new sensations and information that he had to process. Human senses were limited, and he, although superior in nature, had to learn to live by the laws of this physical form. He arrived at a busier boulevard, or at least as busy as it could be at such a late hour of the night. The noise of cars, scattered voices and laughter echoed in the distance, and the lights of advertisements assaulted his gaze. For Xorathis, everything was still unclear. The human world seemed to vibrate at an impossible frequency: organized chaos, functional madness, an amalgam of colors, noises and disparate lives. As he observed the scene around him, a group of young people passed by him, pushing each other and laughing loudly. One of them accidentally bumped into him with his shoulder, but he didn't even notice it. Xorathis stopped. Not because that contact had hurt him, but because he felt, for a split second, a subtle, invisible wave that had passed through his body. It was that mysterious energy that people always emanated without knowing it, their emotions. Each person was a source of feelings: fear, anger, joy, regret. Everything floated in the air, and Xorathis began to perceive these vibrations as musical notes. However, in all that chaotic symphony, a distinct note resonated like a distant echo: Selena Novak. Her name was just a sound to him, but inexplicably, he perceived a subtle wave that seemed to guide him, like an inner compass. As he stood motionless in the middle of the boulevard, his deep eyes fixed on naked, he knew he would find her. Before he left, he looked up at the night sky. The stars were there, just like on the millions of worlds he had seen in his lifetime. And yet, they seemed farther away than ever. This planet had chained him, and for the first time, Xorathis understood how fragile he was. That physical form, he could be hurt, he could be deceived, he could even feel. "It's just a mission," he recalled the High Council's words. But deep down, he felt that something greater than himself had brought him to Earth. The stillness of the night was beginning to be disturbed by the hurried footsteps of other people coming from different directions. Xorathis continued his way, sneaking through the shadows. He walked like a stranger trying to become part of the scenery, with a calculated elegance and almost mechanical movements. Every movement was studied, but nothing seemed entirely natural. In the distance, the bells of an old tower rang out gravely and solemnly, announcing midnight. The sound vibrated through the air, amplifying the sense of alienation Xorathis felt. It seemed as if the city itself was whispering to him, testing him, challenging him to prove his mettle. He stopped in front of an old building, an abandoned library. The walls were covered in graffiti, and the broken windows reflected the weak light of a streetlight. It was a place forgotten by time, but its vibration was strong. His eye, invisible to the energy of the world, felt a distinct wave, a trace of ancient knowledge. "Here I will begin," he whispered, his voice sounding unnatural in the silent night. He entered the abandoned building, passing through the heavy, cracked wooden doors. Inside, the darkness was complete, and the smell of old paper and mold hit him. He felt that this place hid answers, but not about people, but about something much deeper. How much did these creatures know about the universe? About themselves? He looked down at the dusty floor. His footsteps left marks on the barked wood, a sign that he was now part of that world. Each step brought him closer to his mission, but also to a discovery that even he could not have anticipated. In that darkness, for the first time since his arrival, Xorathis felt a cold shiver run through his newly formed body. It was not fear, for he did not know fear, but a premonition, a silent warning that things were about to become much more complicated than he imagined. That night, an alien entity walked among the shadows of the city, and the world did not yet know that it was about to change forever. This expansion adds more atmosphere, subtle interactions with the environment, and deepens Xorathis's first experiences in his physical body. If you want sequels or other details, they are here. Chapter 2. The Human Face. Xorathis had spent his first night on Earth in the shadow of an unknown but fascinating world. The sky had gradually brightened, and dawn had surprised him on a high rooftop, from where the modern city unfolded before his metallic gray eyes. His fascination with this world knew no bounds. The massive glass buildings reflected a blinding light, the traffic pulsed with the hectic rhythm of the morning, and people were beginning to leave their shelters. From above, human beings seemed like ants, fragile and busy creatures, running around incessantly. But Xorathis felt that there was a hidden pattern in all that hustle and bustle. He had learned to adapt his gaze and senses to the limitations of the physical body he wore, but that did not prevent him from feeling the subtle energies of the emotions around him. The city was an amalgam of unspoken desires, worries, and dreams, a collective vibration that overwhelmed him. Selena Novak. Her name had become a constant in his mind, a fixed point that guided him. Like a bright beacon on a dark sea. His mission was clear: he had to find her, capture her, and take her to Vorthera. Without her, the High Council's hopes of saving their own species were doomed. But Xorathis had begun to realize that the human world was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. No living being was just a sum of movements, and Selena was not just a target. He felt it in every fiber of his body. Before he approached her, he had to understand her. He descended from the roof with an agility that would have betrayed his alien nature if anyone had seen him. Clad in simple clothes, a gray shirt and a pair of worn jeans, Xorathis looked like an ordinary young man, but his gaze always seemed lost elsewhere, as if his thoughts were anchored in a different dimension. His attention drifted to a small market nearby, where people were beginning to gather for their morning routine. Street vendors set up stalls with fruit, coffee, and newspapers, and the smell of freshly baked bread and the steam of coffee cups filled the cool air. Xorathis stopped near a group of people gathered around a stall. He listened quietly to their voices, short laughs, monotonous conversations, daily worries. As he scanned the people around him, his eyes detected something distinct a few meters away: a young woman with a black backpack, dressed sporty, with a long ponytail of blonde hair and sure steps. Selena Novak. He recognized her immediately, even though he had never seen her before. Her energy was unmistakable. She was a constant wave in an ocean of noise and volatile emotions, like a distinct melody in an endless chaos. Selena crossed the market. Whither she walked determinately, completely ignoring the hustle and bustle around her. It was a routine for her. Every morning she started her day with A-R-U-N-I in her mind. Discipline and physical movement were the only things that kept her life under control. Xorathis adjusted his posture, instinctively heading in her direction. He was not in a hurry. He watched her from a distance, analyzing her movements, expressions, and the way she interacted with her environment. Selena was focused, but attentive. She looked around her with a subtle caution, as if she were always on guard. The park where Selena used to run was located on the outskirts of the city, far from the noise of the streets. The tall trees and long alleys formed a natural labyrinth, where the only sounds were those of her rhythmic steps and the discreet chirping of birds. Xorathis stopped near a massive tree, hiding among the shadows of the branches. He still did not know how to approach her. Observation was the first step. As he watched her run, he felt an inexplicable force pulling him towards her. In a world where everything was chaotic and contradictory, Selena Novak exuded an order of her own, a determination and an intensity that fascinated him. For a being like Xorathis, who had lived in the shadows of the universe, people's emotions were an enigma, but also a weakness that he thought he could manipulate. However, Selena was different. He felt an inner strength within her that he could not define. That morning, Xorathis took his first risk. He sat down on a bench along her running route and looked up at the cloud-covered sky. When Selena passed him, he let his gaze follow her with a neutral expression. Selena slowed down instinctively. She had a rare ability to observe the people around her, and the young man, who stood still on the bench, had caught her attention. He didn't seem to be there to relax or enjoy the park. His eyes had an unusual intensity, as if they saw more than what was visible. "What are you doing here, alone, at this hour?" Selena asked suddenly, stopping in front of him. Her tone was firm, but not rude. It was a question that hid an attempt at assessment. Xorathis looked up and fixed her with his metallic gray eyes. For a split second, she felt something she had never experienced: vulnerability. "I'm looking at the sky," he answered simply. His voice was calm, but it had a strange melody, like a sound that seemed to come from the depths of time. Selena scanned him with her eyes, trying to decipher his intentions. "The sky. There's not much to see today." Xorathis smiled vaguely, without answering. Selena rolled her eyes slightly, but didn't leave immediately. In some inexplicable way, the presence of this stranger intrigued her. "Are you new to the area?" she asked, trying to understand more. "Let's just say I'm passing through," Xorathis replied, choosing his words carefully. A familiar notification sound from Selena's phone made her jump slightly. She glanced briefly at the screen and resumed her run, leaving Xorathis alone on the bench. Watching her figure recede, Xorathis felt a strange combination of emotions he couldn't define. On Vorthera, emotions were just biological imperfections, but here on Earth, they seemed to be the key to existence. Selena wasn't just a target. She was a gateway to a truth he still didn't understand. That morning, Xorathis made a decision. He had to get to know her better, to discover her weaknesses and strengths. Every step he took towards her brought him closer to his mission, but also to something much more dangerous: humanity. This broad description introduces a slow but tense rhythm, in which Xorathis begins to subtly interact with Selena. Xorathis remained on the bench for a long time after Selena had resumed her running route. The sensation he felt was unsettling. For the first time since he had arrived on Earth, he had met a human being who had triggered something similar to admiration in him. Selena was a combination of strength and vulnerability, a fascinating contradiction that Xorathis had never encountered before. His calculating mind constantly reminded him of his main objective: to capture her and fulfill the High Council's order. But another part, one that was beginning to take root in his soul, whispered to him that Selena was more than a simple resource. He finally got up and began to explore the rest of the park. The alleys were strewn with fallen leaves, as if nature had hidden its tracks under a colorful carpet. The tall trees reminded him of the massive towers of Vorthera's capital, only here. Everything seemed alive and full of emotion. The wind it brought with it the smell of damp earth and the sound of rustling leaves, a symphony that Xorathis was beginning to appreciate in his silence. A group of children ran past him, laughing loudly and leaving behind them traces of vibrant energy. Xorathis stopped suddenly and followed them, captivated by their purity. On Vorthera, childhood did not exist in human form. Their beings were forged, fully formed, with a precise purpose in the social. Chained.It was a world without play, without laughter, and without innocence. These children, with their rosy faces and curious eyes, seemed to be the essence of something he didn't understand: freedom. But his thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected presence. Selena reappeared in his line of sight, this time on the opposite side of the park. She had stopped by an old fountain, leaning against its edge as she checked her phone. She seemed preoccupied. Around her, the world seemed to fade. Xorathis could feel a subtle wave of restless energy pulsing in the air. "Why are you so different?" he whispered to himself, remaining in the shadows and continuing to analyze her. He lacked the courage, or perhaps the clarity, to approach her again. He knew he had to be careful not to reveal her nature too soon. Selena Novak was special, and deciphering this truth could be the key to his mission. To better understand Selena's habits, Xorathis discreetly followed her throughout the morning. After leaving the park, she headed to a small cafe, located on a quiet street. The cafe was modest but welcoming, decorated with warm lights and shelves full of old books. Selena seemed to be a loyal customer. The owner, an elderly man with a white beard and round glasses, smiled warmly at her when she entered. Xorathis waited a few moments before entering as well. He felt a certain awkwardness in the way he entered the confined space of the cafe. The sound of the doorbell made him start slightly. He was not yet used to these small, but meaningful gestures in the human world. He sat down at a table in the corner, where he could observe her without seeming suspicious. Selena had ordered a green tea and opened a book, losing herself in its pages. Xorathis looked around him. People were relaxed, talking in whispers or typing on their laptops. The atmosphere was completely different from the hustle and bustle of the city outside. Xorathis, in turn, ordered a coffee. He hadn't had the chance to taste the drink, but he had seen that people seemed addicted to it. When the waiter brought it to him, Xorathis watched in amazement as the steam rose from the cup. He raised it to his lips and sipped cautiously. The strong aroma invaded his senses, making him wrinkle his nose slightly. Tea was bitter, but in a fascinating way. From time to time, Selena looked up from her book and scanned the room. Xorathis made sure to shift his attention to the window whenever she looked in his direction. Her presence was overwhelming in a way he couldn't explain. It felt as if he had been caught in an invisible net of curiosity and admiration. After a while, Selena closed her book and finished her tea. She got up and left the cafe, and Xorathis followed her example, keeping a cautious distance. The sky had suddenly darkened, a sign that rain was approaching. Within a few minutes, the first drops began to fall, transforming the streets into a continuous dance of lights reflected in puddles. Selena stopped under a massive tree to take shelter. Xorathis, although not afraid of the rain, instinctively stepped into the shade of the same tree. Selena noticed him immediately. "You again?" she said, raising an eyebrow. Her voice was a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Xorathis looked at her calmly. There was no point in hiding completely. "I'm getting used to this world." Selena smiled slightly, this time more relaxed. "Are you some kind of artist or something? You seem like the type who sits and analyzes people." Xorathis hesitated for a moment. Her words had surprised him. Analyzes people in a way, that's what he did, but not in a way she could imagine. "Maybe I am." Selena stared at him for a long time, trying to decipher him. There was something in his eyes she couldn't explain, a deep sadness, combined with an intensity that made her feel like she was talking to someone from out of this world. "Do you have a name?" she asked, breaking the silence. Xorathis hesitated for a split second before answering, "Xorathis." Selena nodded, as if accepting that answer, but a spark of suspicion lit up her gaze. "Strange name, but it suits you." A new gust of rain forced them to seek shelter near a bookstore, and Xorathis realized that he had begun to form a connection. Step by step, Selena accepted him into her life, without knowing the truth about him. And with each moment spent with her, Xorathis felt his own mission becoming more and more complicated. The torrential rain continued to hit the city at a constant pace, creating an oppressive and dark atmosphere. Drops of water hit the windows, transforming the cityscape into a blurry, fragmented world, as if reality itself refused to keep its shape. Xorathis looked out from his rented apartment, located in an old and forgotten building on the outskirts of the city. The narrow window vibrated under the pressure of the wind, and the light of the lamp that burned weakly on the bedside table cast bizarre shadows on the walls. That modest room, devoid of personality, was his temporary refuge, but also a space where loneliness became more unbearable. In the corner of the room, there was a large map of the city, spread out on a wooden table. Different locations were marked with red circles, each symbolizing Selena Novak's daily routes. Xorathis had spent hours analyzing her, creating a pattern to understand her routine. His mission was clear, but in the last few days, something had changed. Doubt silently gnawed at him, and his thoughts were disturbed by the image of the girl. Her piercing gaze, the energy that seemed to vibrate around her. Xorathis lay on the bed, staring at the cracked ceiling. His mind, which usually functioned like a perfect mechanism, began to slip in unpredictable directions. Ancient voices, memories from a world that no longer existed for him, came back, mixing with the sound of rain. For the first time since his arrival on Earth, Xorathis allowed himself to remember that he was risky. Because emotions were considered a weakness on his home world, Vorthera. On Vorthera, he had been one of the best agents of the Supreme Council, a ruthless organization that controlled all aspects of Vortherian existence. Created in a laboratory, Xorathis had never had a childhood. Since his birth, He had been trained to be a perfect warrior, devoid of emotions and devoted to one goal: absolute order and obedience. Memories now took him during a mission in the past, on a planet similar to Earth. Then, as now, he had been sent to capture an anomaly, a unique being, capable of influencing the balance of universal energies. Although he had successfully completed the mission, Xorathis remembered the voice of that anomaly, an old woman, with eyes in which the entire universe was reflected. "You are more than a tool. One day, you will understand." These words echoed in his mind now, with frightening clarity. To the time, he had ignored them completely, concentrating on his duty. But now on Earth, in front of Selena Novak, those words came back like a persistent echo. Xorathis suddenly rose from his bed, unable to bear the pressure of memories any longer. He dressed quickly and went out into the rain. The cold air hit his face, but for him it was a pleasant sensation, almost purifying. The city streets were deserted, and the light of the lanterns reflected in the puddles created a spectral atmosphere. His steps carried him instinctively towards the park where he had first seen Selena. Although he knew it was unlikely that he would find her there at such a late hour, an inexplicable feeling urged him to continue. But fate seemed to have its own plans. When he reached the vicinity of old fountains, a familiar figure loomed in the darkness. Selena stood there, an umbrella in her hand, watching the water falling in thin jets. Xorathis stopped, surprised. The girl did not seem frightened by the rain, but rather absorbed in her thoughts. "You never sleep?" she asked out of the blue, without turning her gaze. Her voice made him start. How had she managed to sense him, although he had not made a sound? "You do not seem to sleep either." Selena smiled slightly, but her smile had something melancholy. "Sometimes, the silence of the night is the only time when you can hear your own thoughts, don't you think so?" Xorathis approached slowly and stopped next to her, without answering immediately. What could she say? That he had never had time to listen to his thoughts? That his life had been one long series of orders and executions? "What brings you here?" she finally asked, turning to him. Raindrops fell down her cheeks like tears. "I'm getting used to your world. I'm trying to understand the people." Selena stared at him for a long time, trying to decipher his intentions. Despite his evasive answers, there was something about Xorathis that made her feel safe. "You have a talent for saying too little, you know that?" she joked, trying to lighten the mood. For the first time, Xorathis smiled faintly. Tea was an almost imperceptible gesture, but enough to surprise Selena. "Maybe I only say as much as is necessary." As their conversation continued, Xorathis began to feel that strange energy pulsing around Selena again. Tea was subtle, but present, like a flame hidden under a blanket of fog. He focused to analyze it better, but at that moment, Selena approached him and touched his arm lightly. "Are you okay? You seem lost." Her touch struck him like a bolt of lightning. The energy he had felt suddenly exploded in his mind, revealing a blinding light. For a split second, Xorathis saw something incredible, a completely different landscape, a world bathed in blue light, where thousands of golden birds flew in an endless sky. It was a vision that seemed to belong to no known place. Xorathis suddenly pulled back, and Selena looked at him in surprise. "What happened to you?" "Nothing," he replied quickly, trying to regain control. "I just got a little dizzy." But inside, Xorathis was shaken. What had that vision been? And, more importantly, what was Selena Novak? In that moment, he realized something disturbing. Selena was no mere anomaly. She was something much more powerful, something even he didn't yet understand. "I should go." Selena looked at him in confusion as he took a step back. "Will we see each other again?" Xorathis hesitated for a moment before answering. "Probably yes." And with those words, he disappeared into the night, leaving Selena alone under the rain that never stopped. Thus, the evening ends on a tense note, where Xorathis discovers fragments of his past, but also clues about Selena's mysterious nature. The rain symbolizes the confusion and inner conflict of the protagonist, and the vision marks the beginning of a truth much more complex than he had imagined. Chapter 3: The Woman and the Mystery. After Xorathis left, Selena remained motionless by the old fountain, staring into space. Raindrops ran down her face, but she did not seem to notice them. In her mind, questions multiplied. Who was he really? What had brought him into her life? Xorathis seemed detached from an old story, a shadow walking through reality with a presence that defied logic. For Selena, meeting him had not been a coincidence. She felt it deep in her soul, like an invisible thread that connected them in an inexplicable way. T had not been just simple curiosity, T was something deeper, a feeling that he would be the key to some answers she had been searching for since childhood. She had always felt that she was different, but until that evening, she had found no evidence to confirm her suspicions. The fountain in the park had a special meaning for her. When she was little, her father had brought her here, telling her that fountains hold the wishes of those who have the courage to whisper them. Over time, the park had become her refuge, the place where she came to find peace in the hardest moments. Now, in this place full of memories, she felt destiny begin to make a visible path in her life. On the other side of the city, Xorathis had retreated to his room. Wet to the skin, he sat on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling slightly. Not because of the cold, but because of what he had seen. The vision of that mysterious world still pulsed in his mind, like a wound that refused to heal. In an attempt to find answers, he stood up and approached a strange device, hidden in a metal briefcase. It was a piece of Vortherian technology, the only thing he had brought with him from his world. Activating the device, a holographic projection appeared in the room, representing an energy map of the city. Fossils of energy appeared and disappeared on the screen, representing the natural flows of the Earth. But right in the center of the screen, where Selena had lived, a bright light pulsed, with an intensity that had exceeded any known values. "Impossible," muttered Xorathis, gritting his teeth. Whatever Selena was, her nature made her extremely dangerous. If the energy he had detected was real, the girl could represent a threat to all of reality. And yet, he felt no danger near her. For the first time in his existence, Xorathis was in conflict with his own mission. The voice of the Supreme Council echoed in his mind, cold and authoritative. Eliminate the anomaly. Any hesitation could cost the balance of the universe. But the voice of the old woman from his memories came back just as strongly. You are more than a tool. He collapsed in his chair, overwhelmed by contradictions. He was no longer sure who he was. Was Xorathis Vorthera's perfect weapon? Or had she become something more since she had arrived on Earth? That same night, in his dream, the past haunted him again. Found himself in the sterile laboratory of Vorthera, surrounded by figures dressed in black robes. He was only a child then, if he could be called that, with large empty eyes, gazing at his creators without emotion. "This specimen is perfect," said one of the figures. "He will be sent on the most difficult missions. His loyalty is absolute." "But what do we do with the defect?" asked another, younger voice. "Defect? The little emotional hesitations? Never mind, we will train him until he is completely naked." Emotions are weakness. In his dream, the young Xorathis turned his head and looked at a mirror on the wall. His reflection seemed to confront him, as if an alternate version of himself was already aware of what he was to become. "You are more than they think," his reflection whispered. One day, you will choose for yourself. The next morning Xorathis woke up suddenly, breathing heavily. The sun's rays were just beginning to penetrate through the tattered curtain of the room. He felt weakened, but at the same time more determined. He gathered his things and left the apartment. It was time to meet Selena again. Not to capture her, but to understand the truth. What was she? And why did he feel that his life, for the first time, had a purpose that went beyond the orders of the council? On his way to the cafe where Selena usually started her mornings, Xorathis noticed that the city had regained its usual hustle and bustle. The streets were full of hurried people, completely oblivious to the invisible energies pulsing around them. When he arrived in front of the cafe, he saw Selena at a table in the corner, a book in her hand and a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. The sun's rays illuminated her face, and for a moment, Xorathis was struck by an inexplicable feeling of peace. Took a deep breath and went inside. "Have you decided to talk more today?" Selena asked, looking up and smiling slightly. Xorathis sat down in front of her and looked her straight in the eye. "I have to tell you something." This sentence opened a new chapter in their relationship, one that would lead them to terrifying truths and revelations about the nature of the universe. Xorathis's inner struggle deepens, and his connection with Selena becomes increasingly complex. The morning after the tense meeting in the cafe, Selena woke up with a strange feeling of unease. The pale light of dawn barely filtered through the heavy curtains, and her room seemed shrouded in an unreal silence. The previous night had been unsettling, and the memory of the mysterious man still dominated her thoughts. Xorathis' gaze remained etched in her mind, those metallic grey eyes that seemed to look beyond the surface, to something much deeper. Selina rubbed her forehead, trying to banish fatigue and confusion. Something in that man's presence had awakened an instinct strange, like a silent alarm going off somewhere deep in her subconscious. Everything about him had been unnatural. His voice, his gestures, the way he had appeared out of nowhere and looked at her with that cold, calculated insistence. At that moment, Selina made a decision. She had to find out more about him. After a quick shower and a bit of coffee, Selina got dressed and left the apartment. The city streets were already crowded, cars honking and people hurrying to their destinations. In that daily hustle and bustle, Selina felt as if she were going against the current. Her mind was no longer connected to routine, but trapped in a labyrinth of unanswered questions. Selina headed to the old library on the outskirts of the city, a place she often visited as a child with her father. Her father had been a researcher, obsessed with unusual theories about the world and the universe. There, among the shelves full of dusty books and forgotten tomes, Selina hoped to find anything, that would help her understand what was happening to her. The librarian, an elderly lady with thick glasses and a gentle smile, immediately recognized her figure. "Selina Novak. I haven't seen you for years. Have you come to look for treasures hidden in books again?" "Yes, Mrs. Maria," Selina said with a forced smile. "I'm looking for something different today. About energy anomalies, theories about parallel existences." Mrs. Maria adjusted her glasses and looked at her for a long time, with a dull curiosity. "Something happened, didn't it? It's not the first time that young people have come here with questions that they themselves cannot explain. Come on, come on." Selina followed her into the back room of the library, where Mrs. Maria unlocked an old, creaky door, leading to a hidden archive. The air was heavy and stuffy, and the smell of old paper immediately enveloped her. "Your father spent a lot of time here, you knew that, right? These books are not for everyone. Be careful what you look for, Selina. Some answers do not bring peace." Selina looked at her, surprised by the librarian's serious tone, but said nothing. She sat down at a table and began to leaf through the old volumes, trying to maintain her concentration. Among the pages of those books, Selina discovered references to mysterious entities, beings capable of crossing from one world to another. Their names appeared in various forms, but one term always came back: symbiote. They were described as beings who could adapt their form and existence to survive in foreign worlds, absorbing the energy or essence of those around them. Some legends portrayed them as saviors, others as destroyers of the natural balance. Reading, Selina felt a cold shiver down her spine. Xorathis, could he be one of these symbiotes? At that moment, a lost childhood memory suddenly came back to her. She saw herself late one evening, in a room lit only by her father's desk lamp. He was talking in a whisper to someone on the phone, his voice trembling slightly. "Her energy, Selina, is special. I don't know what that means yet, but she's not like other children. There's something about her, a kind of resonance with forces that even we don't understand." The memory disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Selina stunned. "Resonance," she said to herself, abruptly closing the book in front of her. If her father knew anything about her special nature, then that could be the key to the whole mystery. Meanwhile, Xorathis watched Selina from a distance, feeling her emotional journey as an echo of his own existence. Lately, his senses had become sharper, more human, and this troubled him deeply. In his metallic grey eyes, reality was beginning to waver. The old orders of the Vortheran Council no longer seemed so absolute. Sunset, when Selina emerged from the library, she found Xorathis waiting for her, supported by a street lamp, in an almost human, relaxed attitude. "You've had a hard day," he said, his voice calm but grave. Selina looked at him, fists clenched and a new determination in his eyes. "Who are you really? What do you want from me?" Xorathis analyzed her for a few seconds, then sighed. "My name doesn't matter. What I am is complicated. But I seek you because you are special, Selina. There is something about you that doesn't belong in this world." "What does that mean?" she asked, taking a step back. "That's what I'm trying to understand too." His words were sincere, for the first time since she had met him. Selina felt a wave of hesitation in him, something she had never seen before. "My father knew something," she murmured. "He knew I was different." Xorathis nodded, as if he had already suspected that. What you know about the world is only a fragment of the truth. There are other dimensions, other energies that flow through space and time. You are connected to them. Selena looked at him in disbelief. And what are you? I am a creation of the world. I come from a symbiote. If you will, I was sent to find you. Why? Xorathis hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice. To take you back. That confession took Selena's breath away. She felt caught in an invisible trap, a web of events she didn't understand, but that controlled her. Xorathis noticed the change in her gaze and felt a strange, unfamiliar pain. I'm not going anywhere, Selena said, her voice trembling slightly. This is my home. Xorathis approached her, and for a moment, the shadows on his face seemed deeper. You don't understand. If you stay here, the balance between the worlds will be broken. Others will come after you, far more dangerous than me. Selena faced him resolutely. Then come, I will not run. Xorathis' gaze grew more intense, but in his eyes there was no longer just recognition or determination. Now there was a deep unease, a kind of doubt that penetrated his heart. In that moment, Selena understood more than she realized. She was not just a piece on the chessboard of a cosmic game, but a much greater force, a being with a special power, who, despite the destiny that had been imposed on her, refused to be manipulated. She could not run, she could not accept a subjugated existence. Although the whole situation seemed to be an impossible maze to escape, Selena felt no fear. A force greater than anything she knew pushed her forward. Xorathis studied her carefully, like a researcher trying to understand an unknown specimen. He approached with small steps, but nothing he did seemed to be a threat. Maybe it's more than a goal. Maybe I'm not just an instrument of the Council's will. Maybe, his thoughts were jumbled, and for the first time, in front of a human being, he felt a feeling he didn't fully understand, a strange empathy. Selena felt stronger than ever. I know you're different from the others. I don't want to believe you, but something tells me there's something else inside you. You're not just a simple instrument. And oddly enough, I can't hate you for it. Maybe we could understand what's going on. You don't understand, Xorathis said, his voice deep, but much more human than in the past. I am not here to save the world. I am not here to save you. My mission is much more complicated than it seems. If you stay here, if you do not submit to the will of the Council, those will come who will not ask, who will not negotiate. They will destroy everything that exists to achieve their goals. You, Selena, are the key to a cosmic puzzle, but you will not be able to control the pieces. Selena understood immediately that, although his words carried immense gravity, Xorathis was not coming with a direct threat. It seemed more like a warning, a cry of a soul caught between duty and its own internal struggle. In that second, her resolve grew with every breath. If I have been chosen for this role, then I will face what comes next. I will not run from fear. I would rather know the truth than live a lifetime in ignorance. A faint smile appeared on Xorathis' face, but it was a sad expression, full of regret. That's the difference between you and me. You have the courage to face the truth. I am just an instrument of a greater will. I have never had this choice. All I know is what I must do, but now, I feel everything changing. The silence that fell between them was charged with an almost palpable tension. Although she realized that Xorathis meant no harm, Selena knew that the truth about what he represented could bring more questions than answers. Even though the entire situation seemed unreal, his words pierced her heart like arrows, piercing any trace of inner peace. You ask me what I will do now? Well, I will face whatever comes. If I face dangers, I will face them with my head held high. And if the truth is more dangerous than I have ever known, then I will fight to understand it no matter the cost. Staring resolutely at Xorathis, Selena realized that the real battle was only just beginning. Few seconds after her words had faded into thin air, Xorathis took a step back, as if to examine her more closely, but without threatening her. He seemed to be in a state of deep contemplation. I wish everything were simpler. But I cannot change who I am. I cannot change my mission. And I cannot change what is written for you. What do you mean? Selena asked, feeling a restlessness creeping into her soul again. You will face much more than you imagine. You are connected to this world and many others in ways you do not yet understand. You are not just a human being. Something older and more powerful flows through you. What you consider normal is only a mask for a much more complex reality. Xorathis paused, his voice taking on a grave tone, as if each word had been carefully measured. The truth about who you really are will probably be harder to accept than you think. The moment you truly understand who you are, you will no longer be able to live as before. Selena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the truth she sought getting closer and closer, but at the same time, getting further away. She was in an impossible situation. She wanted to know everything, but the sword of knowledge was sharp on both sides. Then let me find out. I will seek the answers I carry within me. I will not fear what comes next, Xorathis. You can go now. I will continue on my path. Xorathis looked at her one last time, then took a step back, leaving her the freedom to choose. Although I can't stop you, know that they're not the only ones who notice you. With these words, he evaporated into the night, disappearing without a trace, like a shadow in the wind. Left alone in the middle of the same crowded streets, Selena took a deep breath and clenched her fists. She had no choice but to move forward. Her path was in deep darkness, but she intended to walk it to the end. Chapter 4. Humanity and the Symbiote. The city streets were shrouded in a strange silence that morning, and the sun was barely making its way through the thick clouds, like an uncertain promise. Selena stood at the window, staring aimlessly. It had been a long night, in which sleep had completely eluded her. Every word of Xorathis echoed in her mind like an endless echo, every sentence deepening her anxiety. You are not just a human being. Those words gave her no peace. What did they mean? What could be so different about her? She wondered how many times she had been one step away from the truth without realizing it. Her entire life, every training, every competition, even her career in scientific research, had all had a well-defined purpose. Selena had always been a pragmatic being, built on order, clear routines and logic. Now, her entire world seemed to be crumbling on the edge of a truth she didn't understand. But Selena wasn't the kind of person to accept the unknown with resignation. If there was an answer, then she would find it. If there was something to discover about herself, she wouldn't run away. That was her promise to herself, one that was becoming harder to keep with every passing minute. Even though the city was vibrant and bustling, Selena felt like she was alone. And yet, she had a strange feeling that someone was watching her. This wasn't just ordinary paranoia, she felt a presence, like a shadow creeping under her skin. Xorathis wasn't the first, nor would he be the last, to notice her. Selena knew that. Everything that was happening to her was no coincidence. As time ticked by, Selena prepared for her usual day. A cold shower, a cup of bitter coffee, and putting on her gym gear. Morning workout, it meant everything to her. It was the moment when she could clear her mind, find her balance. But today, balance was impossible to find. Xorathis' words continued to weigh on her soul, questions remaining unanswered. When Selena reached the training room, the empty room greeted her with a cold echo. Usually, it was the first place she found peace, but today something was different. Every corner seemed darker, every noise louder than it should be. During the exercises, she felt a strange force growing inside her. Her fist hit the punching bag with more force than usual, and each movement seemed instinctive, fluid and perfect, as if an unknown energy was guiding her body. Selena stopped, looking at her hands. They were trembling, but not from fatigue. Something inside her was waking up, a part of her that had been asleep for a long time. Was this what she had tried Xorathis to tell her? That this force, this mysterious energy, was part of her? As she wiped her sweat, a strange sound came from the back of the room. Selena jumped and turned suddenly. An unknown man stood at the entrance, dressed in a sober suit and wearing a pair of dark glasses. Selena Novak. His voice was calm, but it seemed devoid of warmth, like a masked command. Yes, who are you? Selena asked, raising her chin with innate determination. I represent an organization that has a great interest in your potential, the man said, walking slowly towards her. Every move was calculated, controlled, and that made the situation seem all the more sinister. Selena felt a shiver run down her spine. Organization? What do you want from me? The man smiled weakly, but that smile did not light up his face. You have nothing to fear. Not yet. We are here to help you understand who you really are. You don't need Xorathis for that. At the sound of the name, Selena felt her heart skip a beat. How do you know about him? We know a lot about you and him, the man replied, moving even closer. But you have nothing to worry about. Soon, you will see the truth beyond the illusion. Without realizing it, Selena took a step back, in an instinctive defensive movement. Something was deeply wrong. This stranger's presence was not only threatening, but also completely different from anything she had experienced before. "I don't need your help," she said firmly. The man took off his glasses, and his gaze hit her like a punch in the stomach. His eyes were empty, completely black, without irises, without light, like two holes in the darkness. "You will understand, Selena," he said, and his voice became slightly distorted. "You are one of us. Your destiny is written in the stars. Stop resisting." That moment, Selena felt the entire atmosphere of the room change. The air became dense, as if a dark cloud had descended around them. Instinctively, Selena adopted a defensive position. She did not know what was going to happen, but she was ready to fight. The man raised a hand, and something dark, a living shadow, began to spread around him. It was as if the darkness itself responded to his command. "You cannot escape, Selena, no matter how much you resist. You will not be able to stop what is meant to happen." That moment, Selena felt a burst of adrenaline. It wasn't just fear, it was a force inside her, the same mysterious energy that had guided her movements earlier. Her body was reacting, and she no longer tried to stop it. With a loud cry, Selena advanced towards the man, striking him with a speed and precision she didn't think she possessed. The man collapsed back, and the darkness around him dissipated for a moment. Selena breathed heavily, feeling that something inside her had just awakened, something dangerous but necessary. The man stood up slowly, a strange smile spreading across his face. "She's starting to wake up, I see," he murmured. Then, like thick smoke, she dissipated completely into the air. Selena fell to her knees, her breathing ragged. Around her, the hall was empty again, and silence returned. But nothing was the same. Looking around, Selena realized that this was only the beginning. Whatever strength was awakening inside her was real. And now, besides Xorathis, there were others who wanted her for their own purposes. In that moment, a single phrase echoed in her mind: "You must find the truth before it's too late." Not knowing where this path would lead her, Selena stood up, determined never to run again. Whatever the answers were, she would find them, and if the darkness followed her, then she would learn to face it. Selena stood up slowly, leaning against the cold wall of the hall. Every muscle in her body ached. She was trembling, but not from physical fatigue. It was something deeper, as if all her connections to reality had begun to break one by one. In her mind, the echo of the stranger's words still lingered. "You are one of us. Your destiny is written in the stars." But who were they? What was that darkness that seemed to respond to the man like a living entity? More importantly, what part of herself was she trying to awaken? Selena looked around the training room, searching for traces of the confrontation. The floor was untouched, the punching bags were in place, and the silence had become heavy and oppressive again. If she hadn't already felt the pain in her muscles and the irregular heartbeat, she would have thought it had all been an illusion. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her thoughts. Something had to be done. She could no longer ignore what was happening around her. If this darkness returned, she had to be prepared. It wasn't just about answers anymore, it was about survival. Selena left the room hurriedly, moving among the people without really seeing them. The city, although as lively and noisy as ever, now seemed a foreign place. The sounds of the street, the horns, the voices, the hurried footsteps, echoed in her ears much louder than they should have. Her senses had become sharper, as if a new perception was born inside her. When she got home, she threw herself on the couch, but the silence of her own apartment brought her no consolation. In her mind, the unknown man, with those eyes as black as the abyss, still appeared to her in fleeting images. Then her thoughts returned to Xorathis. If he knew more about what was happening to her, she had to find him. Selena stood up and opened the desk drawer, taking out the old notebook in which she had written down every strange detail that had caught her attention lately. Notes about strange dreams, about inexplicable sensations and people who appeared and disappeared from her life like shadows. Xorathis was just the last piece in this puzzle. "It can't be a coincidence," Selena muttered to herself, flipping through the pages. A rustle made her jump, and her gaze turned to the window. At first, she saw nothing, but then she felt something, a presence, just like in the training room. She rushed to the window and looked down, towards the street. Nobody. Just a shadow disappearing around the corner of a building. She was being followed again. Selena clenched her fists. Enough. She couldn't stay where she was. If someone was hunting her, then she had to find them before they found her. That night, Selena left the apartment determined to find Xorathis. She didn't know where he might be, but she had an idea. The last time they had met, he had mentioned the boundaries between worlds, and places where reality is thinner. Although they seemed meaningless words, something in his tone had stuck in her mind. Selena reached the edge of the city, in a forgotten park, where the forest had gradually reclaimed its land. The old trees cast long shadows under the pale moonlight, and the silence was almost supernatural. Without the noise of the city, it seemed like she had entered another world. She advanced through the trees. Selena felt the same strange energy pulsing in the air again. It was the same feeling she had felt in the training room. She walked attentive, feeling her heart beating faster with every meter. She knew he was close. Suddenly, a sound echoed behind her. Selena turned quickly, instinctively adopting a defensive position. "You haven't changed at all, Selena," a familiar voice rang out. From the darkness, Xorathis appeared, wearing the same black clothes, like a specter of the night. "What have you done to me?" she asked, angry and confused. "What is this force? And who are those people?" Xorathis looked at her with unearthly calm. "I didn't do anything to you. That strength doesn't come from me, it's always been inside you. I just helped you see what you are." "And what am I?" Selena looked at him intently. Xorathis lowered her gaze for a moment, then answered in a low voice. "You are a point of balance between light and dark. You have a legacy you don't yet understand. But the shadows feel you, Selena. And if you don't train, they will swallow you." "Shadows? Like the man in the training room?" Xorathis nodded. "They are just the beginning. Stronger and more dangerous ones will seek you out." Selena felt anger building inside her. "Then teach me. Show me how to defend myself." Xorathis smiled weakly, and for the first time in his presence, Selena felt a trace of regret lurking beneath that dark mask. "Are you sure you want to go down this path? Once you learn, there is no turning back." "I have no choice," Selena replied firmly. Xorathis looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "Then follow me." That night, Selena took the first step toward learning to control her power. The training ground was not the modern gym in the city, but this ancient forest, where reality seemed to vibrate in unison with her inner energy. Around her, the shadows grew more vivid, and Selena understood a chilling truth. Not only was she searching for answers, but the darkness was searching for her. It was only the beginning of a struggle that would change her forever. Chapter 5. Captive in her own past. Selena felt the cold of the night penetrating her bones, but she walked resolutely after Xorathis, who advanced through the forest with sure steps, as if he knew every stone and every tree root. The silence was deep, interrupted only by the rustle of leaves underfoot and their calm breathing. The moon, barely visible through the treetops, dimly lit this forgotten path. Every time Selena glanced around, she felt that the forest was pulsing in the same rhythm as her heartbeat. The air seemed thicker here, and a strange energy flowed through it, something that could not be explained, but which was beginning to become familiar. "Where are you taking me?" she asked finally, trying to keep her voice calm. "At the border between worlds," Xorathis answered without turning around. "Where you will understand what you have lost and what you will gain if you choose this path." "The border between worlds?" Selena repeated, incredulous. "It sounds like a cheap fairy tale." Xorathis stopped suddenly and looked over her shoulder, those dark eyes that seemed to absorb any trace of light. "Your fairy tale is coming true, Selena. Accept this quickly, or you will be crushed between worlds you do not understand." His harsh tone silenced her. It was a hard reality to accept, but all the strange things that had happened to her could no longer be attributed to chance. The shadow in the training room, their previous meeting, and the feeling that the darkness around her was coming to life were proof enough. After what seemed like an infinite amount of time, the forest opened into a small clearing. Selena stopped, unable to take her eyes off what she was seeing. In the middle of the clearing, a stone archway, tall and ancient, stood like a relic of a time long gone. The stone was covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with a silvery light. "What is this?" Selena murmured, slowly approaching. "The portal between light and shadow," Xorathis replied, stepping beside her. "It is where reality thins. This is where you will begin your initiation." Selena reached out, as if to touch the symbols, so her fingers moved closer, She felt a strange warmth emanating from them, and her skin prickled. "Don't touch yet," Xorathis said firmly. "You are too fragile for that now." Selena withdrew her hand, though she felt an inexplicable pull toward the archway. It was as if a part of her knew the place and longed to touch it again. Xorathis led her to the middle of the clearing, where a circle of